It began on a night that did not belong to any season, when the stars above Earth dimmed for the first time in human history. The sky that had always glittered with comfort suddenly turned cold, as if the universe itself had decided to hold its breath. Astronomers across continents stared at their telescopes, whispering about strange shadows moving beyond the edge of Saturn. Government satellites sent back broken images, fragments of shapes that looked too symmetrical, too deliberate, like wings folded across the dark, and then all transmissions stopped. The entire network of space observation went blind, leaving the world beneath to stare helplessly upward. In the silence that followed, only one thing was certain. The stars were not alone anymore. The fleet came without light or warning, 37 massive vessels gliding through the solar winds like predators through deep water. Each ship covered in black armor that absorbed starlight, their hulls etched with markings older than human speech. They were called the Vornak Hunters, and in every corner of the galaxy their name meant death. They were not soldiers or conquerors. They were perfection shaped into killers, a species evolved to hunt any intelligent life that dared to rise above. Its cradle, they did not build empires, they erased them, collecting trophies from civilizations that thought themselves untouchable. And now, after centuries of silence, they had chosen Earth as their next hunt. Not for power, not for conquest, but for sport, for laughter, for challenge. Around the world, signals failed one by one. Satellites flickered and died. The internet shuddered like a living creature choking on fear. Pilots flying over the Atlantic saw flashes of blue light under the clouds. Military radars lit up with impossible readings. Something huge was entering the atmosphere. Something moving faster than any weapon designed by man. And as panic spread, the Vornak ships positioned themselves like a ring around the planet. Unseen but everywhere. Their scanners. Slicing through every city, every life form, marking prey, tagging hearts, counting pulses. Yet none of them expected resistance. They had hunted hundreds of species. All of them folded quickly, screaming into surrender. They expected the same from Earth. But far away from all that noise, away from the frightened crowds and failing systems, a small mountain town slept under clear skies, its people still unaware that history was bending above them. And inside a dimly lit garage at the edge of town sat a boy of 17 named Eli Carter. Eli was the kind of human the galaxy would have ignored. Quiet, restless, full of small thoughts that mattered to no one but him. He had dark hair that always fell into his eyes, grease on his fingers, and the habit of talking to machines more than to people. The locals called him the Tinkerer. The kid who could fix anything but couldn't fit anywhere. Tonight he sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by parts of an old drone, its plastic shell cracked, its circuit board glowing weakly from the light of a single bulb hanging overhead. He held a soldering iron steady in one hand while the other typed lines of code on a flickering screen. Outside, wind carried the smell of rain and pine through the open window, but Eli barely noticed. His world existed in the small hum of electricity, the rhythm of creation that made sense when nothing else did. He was trying to rebuild the drone's old sensor system, something he had scavenged from broken weather equipment. He didn't know it yet, but those sensors were about to pick up something no human instrument had ever seen. When the power flickered, he frowned, tapping the desk, thinking it was another town outage. But then his laptop glitched, filling the screen with strings of alien code, lines of symbols repeating faster than human language could form. And through the open door came a low rumble, deep and distant. Not thunder but something heavier, slower, ancient. He stepped outside, the night air colder than before, and saw the sky bleeding with light, streaks of blue cutting through the darkness like veins. A fire. Far above the horizon something huge moved, blocking the stars. He didn't understand it, but his heart knew it was alive. He whispered, "What the hell is that?" And the wind carried his words into silence. Across the valley, car alarms went off, dogs barked and stopped suddenly as if the sound had been taken from them. His drone beeped weakly inside the garage, its new sensor flickering, feeding numbers into his computer faster than he could read. And though Eli couldn't decipher it, the pattern was clear. It was scanning, measuring. Something was scanning the entire planet. Half a world away, news channels collapsed into chaos, anchors shouting, governments locking borders, but information still leaked. Strange lights above major cities, massive shadows near the stratosphere. No contact, no demands, just observation, and for reasons no scientist could explain, all nuclear systems deactivated simultaneously. As if the Earth itself had been unplugged, panic turned to helpless quiet, people looking at their dark screens, waiting for gods or monsters to reveal themselves. In orbit, hidden behind the light of the moon, the Vornak command ship waited, its bridge filled with the soft clicking language of hunters. Commander Kresh observed the planet below with something close to amusement. Primitive world, he hissed, his voice echoing through metallic chambers. No defense fields, no shields, only chaos. Another officer replied, "Easy hunt, Commander." But Kresh's eyes, two golden circles reflecting endless hunger, narrowed. Every hunt is easy, until prey learns fear. Down below, in the little garage, Eli didn't yet know the universe had chosen his world. He only knew that something unnatural filled the air. His computer pinged again. A signal had been detected, a repeating pulse unlike anything human-made. He stared at the waveform. It wasn't random, it was rhythm, like breathing, like a heartbeat too large to belong to any creature. He quickly recorded it, adjusted his antenna, and for 1 second, his screen showed a clear image, an object the size of a mountain hovering miles above the clouds, shaped like a blade curved inward, edges glowing faintly blue. His pulse raced. An instinct told him this wasn't discovery, it was warning. He hit the power switch, cutting the feed, but the drone kept humming, its small camera turning by itself toward the open door, capturing the first image of the Vornak ship entering atmosphere. Eli stared at the feed, speechless. Every story he had ever read about aliens suddenly felt childish compared to what hung over his world now. In that same hour, the first blackout spread across North America. Cities plunged into darkness, sirens echoing only for a moment before fading, and the night filled with lights that were not human. Thin streaks moving in formation, silent, graceful, deadly. One of them passed directly above Eli's mountain, low enough that the trees trembled under its vibration. He fell to the floor as the garage shook, dust raining from the ceiling, and through the gaps in the roof he saw the underside of something enormous, smooth, black, and covered in symbols that pulsed like breathing veins of light. His fear didn't scream. It froze, the kind of fear that doesn't run because there's nowhere to go. The ship hovered for seconds, then shot upward faster than his eyes could follow, vanishing into the clouds, leaving behind only silence and the faint hum of power in the air. Eli sat there, breathing hard, his heart pounding, and then his laptop blinked again, new code appearing, words forming through the machine's speakers in a deep, distorted tone. Not English but somehow understandable, a voice that said, "Hunt begins." He stumbled backward, staring at the screen, realizing that the message wasn't directed to him. It was a broadcast meant for others, something across the world, something far bigger. The hunters were calling their kind, announcing the start of their game. He grabbed his phone, tried to call his mother who worked the night shift in town, but the signal was gone. No service, no internet, nothing. He was cut off, alone, surrounded by silence that felt alive. For the rest of that night, he moved through the house like a ghost, gathering whatever tools he could, flashlights, batteries, food. Not because he had a plan, but because something inside him whispered that the world had changed forever. Outside, strange lights flickered in the forest, silent as breath, shapes moving between the trees that didn't belong to any animal. He locked the doors, sat by the window, and watched as one of those shapes stepped into view. A creature taller than a man, thin, yet muscular, its armor merging with its skin, eyes glowing faint gold, scanning everything with cold precision. He held his breath. It turned its head slightly as if sensing him through walls, and then moved on, silent, patient, hunting. While humans hid, the Vornak recorded everything: movement, heat, fear. They didn't need to fight. Their hunt was psychological, breaking prey before killing it. They sent probes into cities, collecting screams, mapping chaos, broadcasting it back to their ships as entertainment, each death another measure of their dominance. And yet somewhere in their network, a small anomaly appeared, a single human signal that didn't fit the pattern, something near the mountains interfering with their scans. Commander Kresh leaned forward, curious. "A distortion?" he asked. "An energy pulse from primitive tech." The officer replied, "Harmless." But Kresh smiled, a predator's smile. Harmless prey is the sweetest. He turned his gaze toward Earth and whispered, "Send a team." Back in the garage, Eli's drone came back to life on its own, its little propellers spinning weakly, its camera turning toward him, the feed showing nothing but static. Yet he swore he could hear something inside it. A pulse, faint but rhythmic, not mechanical, almost alive. He leaned closer, and for a second, the static cleared, revealing a single frame. A face, not human, staring back at him through the screen, eyes glowing gold, the same eyes that watched from the forest. And then the power died completely. He sat in the darkness, trembling, understanding finally that the message wasn't random, that he had been seen, marked, chosen. By dawn, the world had changed beyond recognition. Military forces tried to launch countermeasures, but every weapon failed before ignition. Missiles froze mid-air, aircraft lost control and vanished. Only the old mechanical systems still worked, old cars, old radios, old tools, and in that strange twist of fate, the boy who collected scrap technology now held the only kind of devices the aliens couldn't detect. While news networks tried to calm the public, footage began leaking. Burning cities, ships hovering above oceans, soldiers running without direction, people vanishing into beams of light, and somewhere in all that chaos, the Vornak hunters began descending one by one, walking the surface of Earth, recording every sound of terror as trophies. But in the mountains, Eli watched the sunrise through the fog, his world reduced to survival, his heart filled not only with fear but with something else. Anger. A quiet anger born from watching helplessness, from knowing that no one was coming to save them. He looked at the drone parts scattered on his table and whispered, "If they're hunting us, maybe it's time they learn how it feels." He didn't know yet how far those words would travel, that in a few weeks his name would be whispered across galaxies as the human who turned the hunt upside down. But at that moment, he only knew one thing. The stars were no longer safe, and neither was Earth, and somewhere above, unseen eyes watched the boy through 1,000 screens, marking him as prey number one. And as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the valley in pale gold, one of the Vornak ships shifted position, its shadow falling directly over Eli's house, the commander's voice echoing through the ship's halls. "Begin ground scan, locate the anomaly." And in that instant, the hunt officially began, not for humanity, but for one human, one boy who had unknowingly stepped into the oldest game in the universe, and this time, the prey was already learning how to aim back. The sun rose over the mountains, but it brought no warmth, only the faint gray light that seemed to carry the cold weight of silence. The world was waking up to a nightmare it could not understand. Radio channels screamed confusion, news anchors vanished mid-broadcast, and the governments that ruled nations now whispered from bunkers they no longer trusted. Satellites were gone, internet dead, the stars no longer shone, and fear had turned every human into a shadow behind their own door. But in the little mountain town where Eli Carter lived, the silence felt even heavier. Birds no longer sang, dogs refused to bark. The forest that had once been full of sound now stood still like it was holding its breath. Eli sat inside his garage staring at the drone pieces scattered across the table. His computer still flickering with the strange alien code that refused to disappear, lines of symbols moving on their own as if something on the other side was watching him. He rubbed his tired eyes, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't answer. Who were they? What did they want, and why did the message seem to find him of all people? But there were no answers, only static. He leaned back on the chair, staring at the small screen, the faint reflection of his own face staring back, young, pale, exhausted, and in his eyes something had already changed. Fear had burned into focus. He could feel that this was not random, that the hunters didn't just choose Earth, they were studying it, mapping it, learning how humans reacted to terror. He didn't know it yet, but his name had already been marked on their network. A signal labeled unidentified, anomaly human specimen 001. Outside, the wind carried a strange hum, low, almost musical. The sound of alien drones scanning the land. Beams of light moved slowly across the forest like eyes searching in the dark. Eli turned off the lights in the garage and crouched near the window. He could see the faint blue glow passing through the trees, moving with precision, not random. They were searching for something specific, maybe him, maybe something else. He grabbed his backpack and stuffed it with what little food he had. Flashlight, a wrench, and the small drone core he had built from scratch. He didn't know why, but he couldn't leave it behind. It was the only thing that felt alive in this silence. He stepped outside quietly, the cold biting his face, the air electric with the hum of energy above. He looked up and saw faint trails in the sky, ships moving silently in formation. Their movements too smooth, too deliberate, the way predators circle before they strike. He whispered under his breath. There, hunting. Down the mountain road, the power lines were dead, the gas station empty. A single radio left playing on static. He turned the dial hoping for something, any voice, and for a moment he heard one, faint, distant, female panicked, saying, "If anyone can hear this, run. They're not here to conquer, they're here to." And then it cut to silence. He stared at the radio, his pulse racing, because the voice was familiar. It was his mother's, and though he couldn't believe it, deep down he knew it was. True, she worked in the city hospital, and if the hunters were collecting humans there, she would have seen them first. He slammed the radio on the counter, static hissing, and grabbed his old motorbike from the side. It was half-rusted, noisy, but real, no electronics, no signal to track, the kind of thing the aliens would overlook. He kicked it to life, the sound echoing through the valley like Defiance, and he rode down the road, tires skidding on gravel, every turn a risk, every sound. Behind him a warning. The town he grew up in no longer looked alive, windows broken, cars abandoned, signs flickering with no power, people gone. And above the roofs, the faint silhouettes of alien drones moved like silent vultures, scanning heat signatures, marking survivors. He hid behind an overturned truck and watched as one of the drones descended. Its surface smooth and alive with glowing veins, its single golden eye sweeping the street. It paused near a broken window where a shadow moved, and in an instant a beam of light fired, not to kill but to paralyze. The shadow fell still, and the drone lifted the body into the air before disappearing into the sky. Eli's stomach twisted. The scream echoed once and then vanished. He clenched his jaw, gripping the wrench tightly, whispering to himself, "They think we're animals." He knew now what kind of hunt this was. They weren't trying to destroy Earth. They were taking trophies. He rode through the outskirts, avoiding main roads, using old logging trails that cut through the dense forest, his head filled with static from the broken radio, and every so often, his drone core in the backpack would pulse faintly with blue light, reacting to something nearby. He realized it was picking up the same alien frequencies again, but weaker, almost like whispers. He parked near an old ranger tower and climbed it, scanning the horizon with his binoculars. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 massive ships hovering miles above the ground, beams of light descending from them into cities far away. He could see explosions in the distance, faint flashes like lightning behind the horizon, the world burning quietly. He lowered the binoculars and sat there in silence, breathing hard, trying to think, his mind racing between fear and curiosity. And then it hit him. If his drone could pick up their signals, maybe it could send something back, not to attack, but to listen. Deeper, to understand their pattern, to find their weakness. That night, he returned to the garage and began to work like a man possessed. He connected the drone core to his laptop, powered it with the old car battery, and started building an amplifier out of whatever he could find. Wires from a broken radio, copper from the kitchen kettle, circuit boards from old toys. Every spark that flew lit his face in determination, sweat running down his neck, his eyes glowing with the reflection of the screen. Line by line, he coded in silence, the way his father used to fix engines before he disappeared in the last military conflict. Eli remembered the stories of how his father said machines had their own kind of soul, one that answered only to those who listened, and as he typed the final command, the screen flickered again, this time showing more than code. It showed voices, alien voices, layered over one another, the same language he had heard before, harsh and rhythmic. He slowed the playback, filtering the tone until one sentence emerged clear as human speech. Begin ground hunt. Find the signal. Destroy anomaly. His heart froze. They were talking about him. The air outside changed again, the hum louder now, closer. He turned off the lights and crawled to the window. The forest glowed faint blue between the trees, something massive moving through it. A shape with 4 legs, metallic and alive, scanning the ground, its sensors flashing across rocks and trees. He could hear the vibration through the soil. His drone core pulsed faster, the readings spiking. He whispered, "You're not finding me tonight," and crawled to the far wall, quietly opening the floor hatch that led into the storm cellar. He climbed down and shut it behind him just as a beam of light cut through the garage roof. Dust and wood flying everywhere. The creature scanned the room, the smell of ozone filling the air. Then it left, silent, the hum fading again. He stayed there in the dark, counting the seconds, waiting until he could breathe. And when he finally climbed back up, the roof was half gone, stars staring down at him like eyes. He looked around, his tools scattered, his laptop cracked, but the drone core was still intact, faintly glowing in the dark. He picked it up and stared at it, realizing this was now his only advantage, something the hunters didn't understand. A mind that refused to break, a human who refused to be prey. He sat down in the wreckage, breathing slowly, the fear turning into something else, something harder, sharper, a quiet rage that didn't burn fast but deep. He spoke to himself softly. If they're looking for me, I'll make sure they find me, but not the way they want. He didn't know what that meant yet, but he meant it. He could feel his heart sinking with the faint pulse of the drone, each beat slower, steadier, like the rhythm of something ancient awakening. Far above him, the Vornak command ship received new data. The human anomaly had survived multiple scans, his location unconfirmed. The commander tilted his head and hissed. He's learning. And somewhere deep in the ship's metallic heart, the other hunters laughed in their clicking voices, unaware that for the first time in their history, the laughter no longer belonged to them. The next morning, smoke rose in the distance from where the city used to be, black clouds staining the horizon. Eli stood on the ridge watching it burn. The air filled with ashes that tasted like metal. He could hear faint screams carried by the wind, but there was nothing he could do. He was one boy in a dead world. But that didn't matter anymore. He wasn't thinking of survival. He was thinking of strategy, of patterns, of signals. His mind sharper now than it had ever been. The hunters didn't realize that by isolating humanity they had forced its most dangerous trait to surface. Adaptation. He turned toward the forest, gripping his backpack, and whispered, "Let's see how good your hunt really is." The drone in his hand pulsed once, faint and blue, as if it understood, and he disappeared into the trees, vanishing from their sensors, becoming what they feared most, a human who had learned to move like a shadow. The forest was colder that night, darker than it had ever been. Every leaf on the ground seemed to wait for something. Every shadow looked alive. The air itself was heavy with electricity that hummed through the trees like whispers of something watching. Eli moved through the undergrowth quietly, every step measured, every sound absorbed by the damp earth beneath his boots. His breath formed faint clouds in the air, his hands steady on the rifle he had built from spare parts and old tools. It wasn't a real weapon by alien standards. It was made from pieces of steel, compressed air, and scavenged batteries, but it worked. It fired sharpened rods coated with magnetized dust, invisible to the alien scanners, and that made it dangerous. Above the treeline, the alien drones floated in slow patterns, their golden eyes cutting through the fog like searchlights, but Eli had learned their rhythm. He knew when they turned, when they paused, when their sensors blinked. He knew because he had watched them for days without sleeping, memorizing their habits. The way predators studied prey, he was done being hunted. Now he was the shadow waiting to strike. He reached the old quarry where the trees thinned and the rocks opened into a wide clearing. The moonlight reflected off the pools of water that shimmered with alien residue. One of the smaller Vornak ships had landed there, its hull pulsing faint blue, its engines silent, like a beast sleeping, but Eli knew better. This was a dropship, a hunting base, the kind used by their ground soldiers to track targets. His drone scanner buzzed softly in his pocket, telling him there were 3 of them. Inside, maybe 4, heavily armored, tall, fast, lethal, but predictable. They thought humans were fragile, slow, emotional, and that mistake was about to cost them everything. Eli crouched behind a broken truck near the edge of the quarry, his hands tightening around the rifle, his heartbeat steady, not afraid anymore. He whispered under his breath, "You wanted to hunt, right? Let's hunt." The first alien came out of the ship, tall, armor dark like stone, its claws clicking softly as it moved. Its helmet glowed with faint veins of gold light. It held a long blade made of plasma that cut the air with a low hiss, its head turning slowly as it scanned the area. Unaware that its sensors were being jammed by the small transmitter Eli had buried in the ground 2 hours earlier, the alien looked up, sniffed the air through its mask, a sound like a growl escaping its throat. Then it stepped forward, scanning the wreckage of old vehicles that littered the quarry. Eli watched its every movement through the rifle's cracked scope, the crosshair steady on the alien's chest. But he didn't shoot. Not yet. He waited, letting the creature step closer, letting its arrogance grow, until it was only 20 feet away, and then he pulled the trigger. The shot was silent. A small puff of air and metal. The steel rod shot through the air, invisible, fast, piercing straight through the creature's armor and lodging deep in its chest. The alien froze, a low growl turning into a screech, its glowing eyes flickering. It looked down at the wound in disbelief, its blood glowing faint orange as it stumbled backward, collapsing to one knee before falling face first into the dirt, dead before it could understand what happened. Eli didn't move, his hands still steady, his breathing controlled, his eyes fixed on the second alien that emerged from the ship immediately after, its voice sharp with rage. A stream of clicks and growls echoing through the quarry. It crouched over the body of its fallen partner and looked around, scanning wildly, its armor changing color to blend with the environment. But Eli had already vanished into the shadows, crawling up the rocks behind it. He grabbed a small grenade made from an old oxygen tank and a pressure valve. He had filled it with liquid fuel and a battery core, unstable and deadly. When the alien passed below him, he dropped it. The device hit the ground, rolled once, and then exploded with a blinding flash. The air filled with white fire. The alien screamed, its armor melting, its body thrashing as the flames consumed it. Eli covered his ears, the blast echoing through the forest, birds scattering, the ground trembling. When the smoke cleared, the alien was nothing but a heap of black ash, the smell of burnt metal filling the night. The ship's alarm blared, red light flashing through its interior, and Eli knew more were coming. He moved fast, sliding down the rocks, grabbing the first alien's weapon from its hand, the plasma blade still hot. His fingers burned as he held it, but he didn't let go. He ran behind the wrecked vehicles, the glow of the ship's doorway turning brighter as two more Vornax stepped out, larger than the others, their eyes glowing fiercely, their voices deep, angry. One of them shouted something in their language that echoed like thunder, but Eli didn't stop. He raised the plasma blade and ignited it, its energy humming violently. The aliens turned their heads in surprise, and that was the moment he wanted. He charged from the side, the first swing cutting across the leg of the nearest creature, molten sparks flying. The alien roared, stumbling, swinging its arm to strike him, but Eli ducked, sliding under the blow and stabbing upward, the blade piercing through its armor into its abdomen. He twisted and pulled. The alien fell backward, collapsing into the mud, its claws digging into the earth as its blood hissed in the cold air. The last one raised its weapon, a long spear that fired a burst of plasma, the shot barely missing Eli's head as he rolled aside, the heat searing his cheek. He grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it toward the alien's eyes. The creature laughed, mocking him, its voice deep and metallic. But that second of arrogance was all Eli needed. He hit the button on his belt, detonating the last of his homemade traps, a line of buried explosives made from fertilizer, gasoline, and scrap wiring. The explosion tore through the ground beneath the alien, throwing it into the air, debris flying everywhere. The sound so loud it echoed through the valley, and when the dust settled, there was nothing left moving, only smoke, broken metal, and silence. Eli stood in the middle of the wreckage, the plasma blade flickering in his hand, its glow fading as the energy cell died. His clothes torn, face covered in ash, his chest rising and falling slowly. He looked down at the bodies around him, the impossible truth sinking in. He had killed 3 of the galaxy's greatest hunters alone. He fell to his knees, the adrenaline finally hitting him, his arms shaking, not from fear but from the realization of what he had just done. He looked at his reflection in the pool of oily water near his feet, seeing a boy who no longer looked like one, his eyes cold, his face smeared with blood and soot, the reflection of firelight dancing across his expressionless stare, and he whispered, "You came to hunt us, now I'll hunt you." The wind carried his words through the silent forest, past the smoking wreck, up toward the stars where the remaining ships orbited, and somewhere in the command vessel above Earth. Commander Kresh received the report, his yellow eyes narrowing as he read the data. Unit 7A terminated, 7B terminated, 9C terminated. The message ended with the same coordinates repeating, the human signature still active. The commander leaned forward and hissed, "A human killed hunters? Impossible." But deep down, something old and instinctive stirred in his chest. Not anger, not curiosity, but something his kind had forgotten long ago, unease. Back on the ground, Eli stripped what he could from the fallen aliens. Their armor too heavy to carry, but their technology fascinating. He pulled one of their broken scanners from the wreck. Its screen still flickering faint light. Inside it were lines of alien script, symbols rotating, and a single phrase flashing red over and over, "Priority target, human." He smiled faintly, his hands tightening around the device. "So now I'm the hunt," he muttered. "Good." He took the weapon cores, packed them into his bag, and walked away from the burning site without looking back, the fire glowing behind him like the dawn of something new. His footsteps steady, each one echoing with a silent promise. The first human kill had been made, and nothing in the galaxy could erase that truth. High above, the Vornak fleet shifted positions, hundreds of signals lighting up as hunters prepared to descend. Their laughter no longer confident but sharp, forced, hiding the small fracture of fear forming beneath it. And in that cold silence of space, the commander spoke to his crew, his voice echoing through metal halls. "Find him, find the human who hunts." And across the stars, ships changed course, descending toward Earth like a rain of fire. But they didn't know what waited for them. Below wasn't prey anymore. It was something born from the chaos of a dying world. Something the galaxy had never learned to understand, human defiance. Eli reached the ridge overlooking the valley and sat under a dead tree, his body sore, his hands trembling slightly as the weight of exhaustion finally caught him. He looked at the night sky glowing with alien fire and said quietly, "They'll come for me now." He looked down at the stolen alien weapon, its blade reflecting the faint light of the burning ship. "Let them," he whispered. "I've got enough traps for everyone." And somewhere deep in that forest, where the ashes still smoked and the wind carried the scent of burned metal, a new legend was born. A story that would echo far beyond the mountains, beyond Earth, beyond the stars. A story that began with a boy and his first kill. The forest had not known silence like this before, not even after storms, not even after fire. Now the wind itself seemed afraid to move, every branch still, every leaf wet with the breath of something unseen. Above the clouds, the Vornak fleet burned through the atmosphere like falling stars. More hunters descending, their ships lighting the night with streaks of white fire. They came not for conquest now but for revenge. They came to erase the insult, the stain of 3 hunters slain by 1 human. The thought alone burned their pride like acid, and among them was Commander Kresh himself, the most ruthless of the Vornak. His armor carved with scars from 100 worlds, his golden eyes colder than steel. He stood on the deck of his flagship looking down at the small blue planet that had defied the odds. "Find the human," he hissed to his officers. "I want his scream recorded before we burn this world clean." The hunters roared in unison, their voices shaking the metal halls, their arrogance glowing again. But this time behind that arrogance, hidden in the back of their minds, was something new, something that had not existed in centuries, doubt. On the ground, Eli Carter sat in the remains of an old cabin halfway up the ridge, his eyes red from exhaustion but sharp, his hands busy wiring another trap, small, precise, efficient. He had turned the alien technology he stole into tools of chaos, small drones he could control manually, old car batteries he converted into EMP mines, and his favorite creation, the pulse disruptor, a handmade device that scrambled alien scanners for 30 seconds at a time, enough to make even the hunters blind. Every hour he worked and every night he planned, his notebook filled with diagrams, calculations, and maps drawn by memory. He had learned how they thought, how they moved, how they hunted, and he knew one thing. Their strength was their weakness. They were predictable, disciplined, overconfident, but humans thrived in chaos. And chaos was what he intended to give them. The first time he heard their ships again, the sky rumbled, trees shook, and light flickered across the clouds. He smiled faintly. "Round 2, he whispered, grabbing his rifle and the small detonator around his wrist. His heart calm, his mind clear. No fear left, only focus. He walked into the forest like a shadow returning home. Hours later, deep inside the valley, The first alien squad landed, 5 of them, their armor gleaming, their scanners sweeping wide arcs across the trees. Each step they took left a faint burn mark on the ground. Their movements perfect, silent, they spread out, following the signal trail of the human anomaly they tracked for days. They didn't know that Eli had planted that trail himself. He had recorded the signal of his drone and looped it, feeding false coordinates to their system, leading them right into the place he wanted. The old power station ruins near the river. A maze of concrete and steel now overgrown with moss, quiet, cold, forgotten, perfect for a trap. He watched them from the shadows, lying flat on the ground behind broken pipes, his finger hovering over the detonator, his eyes tracking their movement through the reflection of a cracked window. The leader signaled the others, raising its weapon, scanning the dark corners. Human presence confirmed. It said in its harsh voice, and then everything went still. For a second even time stopped, and in that second Eli pressed the button. The ground exploded beneath their feet, fire and debris flying in every direction. 2 of the hunters thrown into the air, their armor dented, their sensors blind. The others scrambled to recover, shouting in their clicking tongue. One of them fired a plasma burst blindly into the smoke, melting through walls, but Eli was already gone, moving fast through the shadows, switching positions, using the smoke as his cover. He came out behind them, his rifle steady, his aim perfect. He fired twice, the first shot hitting one in the neck, the second hitting another through the chest. Both fell instantly, their blood glowing in the dark. The survivors turned and fired toward the sound, their beams cutting through air. But he was already above them on the catwalk, dropping another homemade explosive. It landed between them with a hiss before erupting into a blinding flash. The last 2 screamed, their armor sparking as circuits burned out, and when the light faded, Eli stood on the catwalk, holding the alien weapon he stole earlier, its barrel glowing with blue fire. He aimed it straight at the commander of the squad and said quietly, "You're not hunting anymore," and pulled the trigger. The energy bolt hit the alien in the chest, throwing it backward into the steel wall, the impact cracking its armor, smoke rising as it fell limp to the ground. Silence followed, heavy and absolute, only the faint crackling of fire breaking it. Eli looked around at the wreckage, at the bodies lying broken among the ruins, and for the first time he didn't feel shock, only purpose. He turned off the weapon, letting it cool, his mind already moving to the next step. They would send more, many more, and he needed to stay ahead of them. He grabbed their scanners, tore them apart, rewired the cores to feed back false data. Now every alien ship in orbit would see thousands of human signals across the forest instead of one. He smiled to himself. Let's see how you like being confused. Far above, in the flagship, Commander Kresh slammed his clawed hand on the control panel, the screens flashing red with interference, hundreds of false readings blinking. "What is this?" he roared. "A virus? Impossible. They can't hack us," his officer stammered. "The signal originates from the surface, from the human zone." Kresh turned slowly, his golden eyes burning. "He's toying with us?" The thought filled him with a rage that made his voice shake. "A primitive," he growled, "playing games with hunters." He leaned closer to the console, his voice turning cold. "Send the predators, all of them." Back on the ground, Eli was already on the move, traveling through the forest toward higher ground. He carried a small transmitter strapped to his chest, its antenna sticking out of his jacket. Every few minutes he changed frequencies to stay ahead of their scans. The night sky glowed faintly orange from fires burning in the distance, the world below collapsing under alien confusion. But here in the mountains, a single human was outsmarting the most feared killers in the galaxy. And with every victory, the legend of the Grumpy Terran was beginning to spread. Alien soldiers whispered on their comms about a ghost they couldn't catch, a human who moved faster than sensors, who struck without warning, who laughed before vanishing into smoke. None of them knew his name. They called him the Shadow of Earth, and though Eli never heard those words, he felt their fear in the way they hesitated, in the way their ships moved slower now, scanning twice before landing. He reached the old watchtower on the ridge, the same one he used before, and set up a new transmitter using the alien power cells. He tuned it until he picked up their communication. The harsh clicking language now familiar to his ears. Through static he heard their commander barking orders. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "So you're getting angry? Good." He pressed the record button and spoke into the mic, his voice calm, sharp, every word slow enough to pierce their pride. You wanted a hunt, you found one, but you forgot what humans are made of. We don't die quiet, we fight loud. He transmitted it across their open channel, his voice echoing through their ships, and in that instant every Vornak in orbit heard him, the sound of a boy's voice echoing through their fleets, confident, mocking, fearless, the sound that would haunt them for generations. The commander froze when the message reached the bridge, every officer staring in silence, the human voice still playing. We don't die quiet, we fight loud. Kresh's claws dug into the metal railing, his eyes glowing brighter. Find him now, he screamed, but none of his officers could answer. The human signal was gone, erased completely, leaving behind only static. He slammed his fist down again, bending the metal, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something burning in his chest that wasn't rage, it was fear. On the mountain, Eli sat against the tower wall, staring at the stars that no longer looked peaceful. He could see their ships moving slowly, circling, unsure. The predators had become cautious. The balance had shifted, and he smiled to himself, tired but alive. He whispered, "You wanted the game to begin, so now it begins?" He looked down at the alien scanner still flickering faint blue light and added softly, "Let's see how the galaxy reacts when their hunters lose to a kid with duct tape and bad luck." The wind howled through the broken tower, carrying his words far across the valley, and somewhere, deep in the silence of the night, the hunt truly turned, not in favor of the strong, but in favor of the one thing the galaxy had never understood: human stubbornness, human madness, and the unbreakable will of one boy who refused to die. The galaxy was watching now, silent, uncertain, waiting to see how a primitive species could defy the most feared hunters in existence. The Vornak fleet hung above Earth like a crown of fire, thousands of ships scanning the planet. But their scans returned confusion, false signals, echoes of their own weapons. The network was collapsing from within, and no one could explain how. Every command given by their leader returned delayed. Every hunter team reported losses without visual confirmation. Something was wrong. Something they had never faced before. Commander Kresh stood at the center of the flagship bridge, his claws tapping against the floor, his golden eyes glowing with frustration. "They are ghosts," one of his officers said in fear. "They strike and vanish. They move without pattern." Kresh snarled, "Nothing moves without pattern. Find it." But even he knew the truth. He didn't want to speak. This wasn't chaos. It was precision, human precision, unpredictable only to those who never learned fear. On the surface, Eli Carter moved through the mountains like a storm wrapped in silence, his clothes torn, his body aching, but his mind sharper than ever. He had learned to read their movement by sound alone, the hum of their scanners, the faint vibration before they fired. He had become something else now, something between prey and predator. His traps covered miles, connecting through old power lines he had repurposed into detonators, and every explosion that echoed through the forest carried his message: "You are not safe here." He spoke to them through every act of destruction. His rage turned into strategy, his pain into fuel. He no longer fought for survival. He fought because it was the only language they understood. Each night he listened to their signals, the alien voices filled with confusion, panic, and anger. Sometimes they argued among themselves, calling the humans vermin. Sometimes they whispered that Earth itself was cursed, a world that refused to bow. He smiled every time he heard that, because he knew now that fear was spreading faster than their fire. One night he climbed to the top of the old observatory near the ridge. The dome cracked open. The telescope shattered long ago, but from there he could see the entire valley glowing faint blue under the alien searchlights, the horizon dotted with burning cities. The sky filled with falling debris from destroyed drones. The world had fallen, but it wasn't broken. He could still feel something alive in the air, like the planet itself was breathing, waiting. He turned on the alien communicator he had taken from a dead hunter and switched to their command channel. His voice quiet but firm. "You don't understand us," he said, his words echoing through the static. "You think killing makes you powerful. You think fear means control. But you've never met a species that thrives on pain, that learns from it, that grows sharper the more you hurt it." He paused, his tone colder now. "Welcome to Earth. Commander. Up in orbit, the Vornak officers froze as the message echoed through their ships. The humans had broken through their encrypted frequencies again. Impossible by any logic. But there it was, clear, human, mocking. Kresh clenched his fists, his claws slicing through the control panel, sparks flying. "Trace it!" he shouted. "Find that voice!" But they couldn't. Every time they tried, the signal bounced, splitting into dozens of decoys, spreading across continents. He stared at the planet below, the blue marble glowing beneath the black, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something crawling under his skin. Not physical, something deeper. Something he hadn't known since he was young. A whisper of fear. Back on Earth, Eli disconnected the device and leaned against the railing, his eyes staring at the stars above, his face dirty and pale but calm, the wind blowing his hair across his forehead. He whispered softly, "Let them come." He knew the hunt had changed completely. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about what humans could become when cornered. He had seen what fear did to his people. It didn't destroy them. It united them. Survivors were gathering in caves, soldiers rebuilding with scavenged weapons, engineers reprogramming alien tech. People were fighting back not because they were ordered to, but because something ancient inside them refused to kneel. It was spreading like wildfire, and it started with a boy who refused to hide. In one of the ruined cities, far from the mountains, a small group of survivors managed to hack into the alien broadcast channels using Eli's frequency data that had been spreading through underground networks. They sent out a simple message across all open lines. Humanity still stands. And that message reached more than just humans. It reached other species in the galaxy who had been slaves to the Vornak, civilizations that once bowed to the hunters, watching the live feed in disbelief as humans fought back with sticks, fire, and stolen technology. Their ships burning alien war machines, their voices filled with defiance, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy saw the Vornak bleed. Kresh watched all of it from the command bridge, his officers showing live transmissions intercepted from the lower decks, humans ambushing hunter teams, destroying equipment, sabotaging dropships. Every report ended with the same two words: human resistance. His voice trembled as he muttered, "This can't be real. They're primitives, they can't organize." His second officer spoke carefully. "Commander, they don't need organization. They adapt." Kresh turned sharply. "Adaptation is chaos." "No," the officer replied, his tone almost fearful. "It's evolution." The room fell silent, the screens flickering with images of burning forests and human figures disappearing into smoke. For the first time in their recorded history, the hunters realized that fear had shifted direction. On the ridge, Eli sat inside a cave lit by the soft glow of alien devices he had repurposed, his drone hovering silently beside him, now armed with small explosives and sensors that could track movement within a mile. He looked at the device and said quietly, "We're not done yet, buddy." His voice calm but cold, the kind of calm that comes after you've accepted the war inside your soul. He opened his notebook, the pages now filled with sketches of new traps, radio frequencies, and even alien weapon blueprints he had learned to read. His brain processing faster every day, sleepless, wired, sharper than it had ever been. The world had forced him to become something it needed, a weapon, and he didn't resist it. When night fell again, the stars flickered as more ships entered orbit, hundreds of them, all hunting for one boy. Their scanners sweeping continents, their drones patrolling oceans, but every time they found movement, every time they locked onto a human, the signal jammed. The screen filled with noise. Eli's virus was spreading through their systems like wildfire, feeding their networks false data, showing them phantom armies, millions of fake heat signatures, fake gunfire, fake explosions. The Vornak began wasting resources firing at ghosts. Their soldiers grew paranoid, shooting at shadows, their morale breaking. Commander Kresh slammed his clawed fist against the console again and shouted, "He's inside our system." "Impossible," one of his officers said weakly. "Primitive humans can't breach Vornak firewalls." Kresh hissed, "Then explain this," pointing at the screens showing their ships firing at empty ground. "Explain how a species we were supposed to hunt is hunting us instead." His voice echoed through the bridge, sharp and furious. But the silence that followed felt heavier than truth. It was already too late. The The virus wasn't just in their system. It was in their mind. Below, Eli looked at the signal map on the alien tablet, the glowing lines of their communication grid breaking apart. He watched it like a painter watching his work, his hands still dirty with grease and blood, his lips barely moving as he whispered, "You wanted a challenge? I gave you one." He leaned back against the rock, eyes half closed, exhausted but satisfied. Above him, the sky glowed red with burning debris, pieces of destroyed ships falling through the atmosphere, raining fire across the horizon, the air shaking with distant thunder. He smiled faintly. "Now you'll see the human problem," he muttered. "You can kill one of us or 100, but you can't kill the idea that we don't give up." In the silence that followed, he could hear faint signals through his earpiece. Other humans, survivors, military voices, engineers, scientists, all using his coordinates, his frequencies, his tricks, spreading across continents, fighting back in ways small but powerful. Humanity was waking up, and in the far reaches of the galaxy, where the Vornak's reputation once ruled like a god's command, other species were watching Earth's rebellion and whispering one terrifying sentence. "If humans can do this to the hunters, what will they do to us?" Commander Kresh stood alone in the observation chamber of his flagship, staring down at Earth, his reflection glowing in the glass, his voice a whisper now. "We were supposed to hunt them, not create them." His claws trembled, his rage no longer pure, his certainty gone. For the first time he understood that he hadn't come to destroy a species. He had come to awaken one, and deep inside that realization lay the truth he refused to say aloud. The humans were not the problem. The problem was that the galaxy had forgotten what fear looked like, and now Earth was here to remind them. The fires of Earth burned bright enough to be seen from orbit, continents glowing like embers under a black sky, and yet somewhere in that ruin, a single voice had begun to rise above the silence. It wasn't the voice of armies or generals. It was one human speaking through stolen alien channels, cutting through encryption like a blade through silk, a 17-year-old boy whose name the galaxy didn't know but whose words would echo forever. Eli Carter sat inside the half-destroyed observatory, his back against cold metal, his drone hovering nearby, its broken lens reflecting the faint glow of his screen. He had spent days rewriting alien code, line by line, alone, exhausted, starving, but he didn't stop, because the world below him wasn't quiet anymore. Humans were fighting back in every corner, civilians with scavenged rifles, pilots flying without radar, engineers rebuilding with candlelight. No one gave up, no one surrendered, and that defiance gave him fuel, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling but steady on the keyboard. He whispered, "Let's show them what we are," and pressed enter. The signal pulsed outward, jumping from one alien satellite to another, faster than their firewalls could block, spreading like wildfire through their entire galactic network, reaching not just the Vornak ships but every world that ever feared them. On the bridge of the flagship, alarms blared, screens flickered, the crew shouted warnings. "Unauthorized transmission detected. Source Earth. It's penetrating the main relay." Commander Kresh turned, his golden eyes narrowing. "Block it!" he roared. But before they could react, the lights dimmed, every display on the ship froze, and then the voice came through, not through speakers but everywhere, through every comm, every console, even through the hull. The voice of a human carried on their own technology, calm, cold, filled with something ancient and unbroken. To the galaxy watching this, Eli's voice said, "You called us primitive, you called us emotional, reckless, violent, you called us prey." His words rolled like thunder, low and steady. "But tell me, what kind of prey learns your weapons in a week? What kind of prey breaks your code, hijacks your fleet, and makes you afraid of your own scanners?" The bridge fell silent, the crew frozen. Even the hum of the ship felt smaller now. "You came to hunt," Eli continued. "You came to laugh, to make sport of our lives, but you forgot who we are. You forgot that we were born under skies that burned us, oceans that drowned us, wars that nearly erased us. We survived our own monsters long before yours arrived, and we didn't survive because we were strong. We survived because we refused to die quietly." Across the galaxy, the transmission reached 1,000 worlds, from frozen moons to desert colonies. Species that had always bowed to the Vornak listened in stunned silence, watching the feed that appeared on every screen, showing a teenage boy in torn clothes sitting before a shattered console, firelight flickering behind him, the ruins of a world still burning but his voice unwavering. We don't need your pity, we don't need your help, we don't need your counsel, we need you to remember. He said, his voice sharper now. Remember that humans are not the ones you conquer. We are the ones you create when you push too far. You didn't come here to end us. You came here to remind us who we are, and now you'll remember that too. The image glitched for a moment as alien systems tried to cut it off, but the virus embedded in his message held strong, rerouting every attempt to block it, forcing the feed through again and again, each repetition louder than before, each word a hammer against the Empire's pride. Kresh watched in silence, his breathing heavy, his claws trembling. End the transmission? He screamed, but nothing responded. The ship's AI was silent, the controls dead, the message unstoppable. You can kill our cities, burn our skies, erase our names from your archives. Eli's voice echoed through the halls. But you can't kill what made us human. You can't erase our defiance. It's in our bones, our blood, our history. We built this world from nothing but pain and courage. And we'll rebuild it again after you're gone. We always do. The image zoomed slightly as his drone adjusted its lens, showing his face clearer now. Tired, dirty, but alive, eyes bright like fire. This is our message to the galaxy, he said softly. You fear us now because you finally understand us. You can end the hunt, or we can finish it for you. On dozens of alien homeworlds, crowds gathered in disbelief, staring at the transmission that no authority could stop. The image of a single human boy speaking like the voice of an entire species. His tone not begging, not threatening, but declaring entire civilizations that once cheered for Vornak hunts now fell silent, their laughter dying in their throats. The hunters who had seen themselves as gods were now being mocked by the very thing they had called weak. On the Vornak fleet, morale broke completely, soldiers refused to deploy, their commanders afraid to leave the ships. Whispers spread like infection. The humans are not prey, they are plague, and fear began to eat them alive. The message lasted only 5 minutes before the feed cut out, the screens returning to static. The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Kresh stood frozen in place, his golden eyes reflecting the empty signal feed, his voice low, barely audible. He infected the network. One of his officers said weakly, "The transmission has spread beyond our control. Every allied system is receiving it. They've seen everything." Kresh turned slowly, his face pale beneath the armor. "Then the galaxy knows," he said. "And if they know, they will never obey us again." Far below, in the ruins of the observatory, Eli leaned back against the broken wall, his chest rising and falling slowly. His lips curved into a small, tired smile. He whispered, "They heard it." His drone beeped softly beside him, its light flickering. He reached out and patted its side. "Good job, buddy." His voice faint, his body shaking from exhaustion. He looked up through the cracked roof, the sky above glowing faint blue from the burning ships, and said softly, "Now they know what Earth sounds like." The wind carried his words out through the shattered dome, across the forest, past the mountains, until they vanished into the night. In orbit, the Vornak fleet began to retreat, not by order but by instinct. The hunters no longer eager for trophies, now terrified of ghosts they couldn't kill, their commander silent, his pride shattered, his empire's name burned into humiliation. And as their ships left Earth's orbit, a new signal appeared, faint, rhythmic, repeating across their comms. A heartbeat, slow and steady, the sound of a human pulse, the last part of Eli's message coded deep within the virus, impossible to delete. It played on loop across the galaxy for days, a reminder that the prey they once mocked was still alive, still watching, still waiting. On distant worlds, children of other species asked their parents what the sound meant, and their parents answered quietly, "That's the sound of Earth." And somewhere in the vast dark between the stars, every hunter who had ever laughed at humanity heard that heartbeat and understood the truth too late. You can silence a world, but you can never silence what it taught you to fear. The sky above Earth was no longer filled with ships but with ashes, fragments of burning metal falling like snow, lighting the atmosphere with trails of fading fire. The Vornak fleet was leaving, not in victory but in silence, their formation broken, their discipline shattered. The hunters who once saw themselves as gods now fled like frightened animals from the very world they had come to conquer. Every communication channel across the galaxy echoed with one thing only: the sound of a human heartbeat, slow, constant, unstoppable, a reminder that the hunt they began had ended with their own fear. Commander Kresh stood alone in the dark bridge of his crippled flagship, the lights flickering, the crew gone, most dead or deserted. His claws covered in black ash, his voice barely a whisper. "They should have been easy," he said to no one. "They were supposed to fall." But even as he said it, he knew that lie no longer comforted him. His golden eyes turned toward the small blue world below, the scars of battle still glowing faint on its surface, and for the first time in his long and merciless life, he bowed his head, not out of respect, but because something deep inside him had broken, the belief that the galaxy belonged to the strong. On Earth, the fires were dying slowly, cities smoldering, oceans steaming, forests blackened. Yet life still moved beneath the ruin, people crawling from shelters, blinking under gray skies, bloodied but alive, humanity breathing as one. Their world battered but unyielding, soldiers looked up to the heavens where the last of the Vornak ships retreated and whispered, "Go on, run." The words carried by the wind across mountains and rivers until they reached the broken observatory where Eli Carter sat watching the dawn rise for the first time in weeks, his face pale, eyes tired, one hand resting on the ruined drone beside him, its small light flickering weakly. He smiled faintly. "We did it," he said softly, though no one answered, his voice echoing in the empty hall. He looked out through the shattered glass, the sky painted orange and gold, the heartbeat signal still pulsing faintly through the static of his transmitter, reaching stars that had never known Earth existed. And he whispered, "Let them remember." Far beyond, in the galactic center, the message of Earth had spread like light through glass. One by one the systems that once feared the Vornak began to rise, slaves breaking chains, worlds refusing tribute, old empires crumbling, and every revolution carried a single symbol. The circle and the dot, the mark of Earth, painted on walls, carved into ships, glowing on rebel banners. It meant defiance, it meant survival, it meant that fear had changed masters. The galaxy had learned the cost of underestimating a species that built weapons from scraps and hope from ashes. And though Eli Carter would never see it, his words had become a creed, a prayer whispered across 1,000 stars. "We don't die quiet, we fight loud." Commander Kresh's ship drifted near the edge of a dying sun, its engines failing, the metal groaning under heat. He stood by the viewport, watching the stars blur, his mind replaying the human boy's message again and again, the voice that refused to fade. He could still hear it echoing through his head. "You forgot who we are," the words cutting deeper than any weapon. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Maybe we all did." And with that, he gave the final order of his command. "Deactivate systems." The ship's lights dimmed, its engines cooled, and the once great hunter fleet went silent, vanishing into the void like ghosts finally accepting their own death. Back on Earth, months passed, seasons tried to return. Nature began to breathe again. Rain washed over burnt soil, grass grew where fire once burned, humanity rebuilt slowly but with purpose, their unity forged in the flames of invasion. The governments that once fought each other now worked side by side, rebuilding cities, restoring power, teaching children not about fear but about pride, about the day the galaxy came for them and failed. Monuments rose from the ruins, not for victory but for remembrance. In the capital of the New World Council, a statue stood at the center, Eli Carter, sitting with his drone at his feet, eyes turned toward the stars. Beneath it, engraved in steel, were his words. "They came to hunt us and left fearing the dark." The galaxy called it the silence of Earth, a century of quiet that followed. No species dared to approach the blue planet again, not out of mercy but out of instinct, because somewhere deep in the collective memory of every civilization, the story remained. The Vornak hunters, the unstoppable predators, were defeated not by armies, not by technology, but by a boy who refused to kneel, and that truth was more terrifying than any fleet. On distant worlds, Children of other species whispered his name like a ghost story, Eli of Earth, the boy who turned fear back on its makers. They said he still watched from the dark, his signal hidden somewhere in the void, waiting, patient, the heartbeat of Earth still echoing between the stars. Years later, as night fell over the rebuilt cities, humanity learned to live with the silence they had created. No one looked at the stars the same way anymore. There was awe, yes, but also warning, because they knew the galaxy was still out there, watching, waiting, and so were they. The Terran defense networks rebuilt quietly. Hidden beneath the clouds, new ships crafted in orbit, not to invade but to remember, every engine humming with the sound of that same heartbeat. Slow, steady, human. In the silence of space it was almost music, a reminder that fear had a teacher, and its name was Earth. Eli Carter disappeared soon after the war ended. Some said he died in the mountains where it all began. Others believed he joined the first Terran fleet that left the solar system in secret, searching for the stars that once mocked them. But no one ever found his body. No grave, no trace, only his voice remained. Recorded, preserved, played once a year on the day the skies dimmed again, his message echoing through every speaker on the planet. This is who we are. Remember it. And when the message ended, for 1 minute the world went silent. No sound, no movement, only the faint pulse of the signal that had traveled across galaxies, reminding all life that the hunt was over, and the hunters had become the hunted. High above, in the black ocean of stars, something stirred again. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a ripple in space, faint, rhythmic, like the echo of a heartbeat that refused to fade. And somewhere far away, on a world that once cheered for Vornak hunts, a child looked up at the night sky and asked her father, "Do you think they'll come back?" The man smiled faintly, his eyes soft with memory. "Maybe," he said. "But if they do, they'll remember what fear sounds like." The child tilted her head. "What does fear sound like?" And the father looked up, listening to the wind carrying that ancient pulse through the night, and whispered, "It sounds like us."